Next up, we're going to jump straight into our next session with my boy Scott. Um, I was talking with Curtis, the owner of Funk Coffee Bar, earlier about Scott's business, Block Rewards, and how the integration between a Bitcoin merchant and your platform is helping Orange Pill people through a smooth process, through professional work, being rewarded with the money that they deserve for their hard time and effort that they're giving. So it's a super exciting opportunity that people have to be able to enter into Bitcoin through block rewards. And it's my pleasure to present Scott's talk, which is monetary entropy and value of time. Big thinker, big ideas. Scott likes to push very interesting ideas to be able to get to why we use this thing called Bitcoin and why it is such a beautiful invention. So Scott, let's welcome him on stage. We got Scott Dedels. Thank you.
How do I change the... Yeah.
All right, you can throw them on the screen actually.
Okay.
You got a lappy or anything?
I sent it into Emilio.
Yeah, I do have. Okay. You just want to introduce yourself real
Yeah,
quick
sure.
as we,
Cool. Nice to see some familiar faces and some new ones. While they're organizing the slides, the subject of today's presentation is something that I spend a lot of my own time thinking about. I think at Bitcoin we get lots of really great content around macroeconomics and monetary theory and currency debasement, and everyone kind of like has their own entry point into Bitcoin. But often it's more of these traditional things. Myself, after that then became kind of more interested in Gigi's Bitcoin is Time was something that really got me first thinking about like, wow, this idea is potentially a lot bigger than money. And I think, the beauty of Bitcoin is you can be as interested in the minutia or as like up at 50,000 feet, and there's room for everybody in between. So I'm fascinated by the notion of what money is and by what we are trying to accomplish when we think about how money shapes our shared understanding of the world around us. And I also think that we need different terms to talk about Bitcoin, because we tend to talk about Bitcoin in monetary terms because we think about it like an investment or like it's money, which is not wrong. But in describing it in that way, we also create kind of the limitation that happens with language. So thinking about different terminology potentially maybe lets us expand to consider what Bitcoin is actually doing and the problems that it's potentially solving in a different way. And actually, when I started this, I wasn't thinking that the preamble was going to need to be this long, and I had just run out of preamble, but this is perfect. Stalling complete. Monetary entropy and the value of time. Okay. I think I'm a fan of films, and I love Christopher Nolan, and I love this movie Interstellar, and many of Christopher Nolan's movies are about time, and it's just an interesting thing to me that Bitcoiners kind of latched on to this scene, which became a meme when somebody swapped in Michael Saylor. If you haven't seen Interstellar, they've something's gone sideways on the space mission, and this guy's accidentally lost 21 years, and he's watching videos in the movie of his kids, and their entire life is playing out in front of him. And what he's, it's like this emotional pinnacle of this great film, and why it's so powerful is because everybody, I think on some deep internal level, understands how precious time is, because we talk about the finite nature of Bitcoin, but truly the most finite thing anyone has is time, because none of us actually know how much of it we have. And what we do know is eventually for each of us, everyone in this room, it will run out. And so the notion of having lost your time, which is what he's really experiencing here, is like a super visceral thing. And and so, I think that we have been thinking about time, and we have been trying to solve this problem of lost time since the beginning of time. And part of how we started thinking about money was an invention that allowed us to describe some combination of value and time. It was a tool that we needed so that we could turn our efforts into something that we could exchange with other people for their efforts, so that we could organize ourselves into complex societies. So we've been thinking about this problem since we started organizing ourselves into civilization, because we understand this problem of our own. And I think it's not just that we know that we are all on the clock, but it's also true that many of us in a perfect world would be able to store the fruits of our labors even beyond our own life. And like, a lot of us today think about trying to pay it forward to kids and grandkids, and like my parents personally have this absurd plan to like not spend their money because they really want to give it to me. And that's true of a lot of people. And so we started inventing money, and the earliest known form of money were clay tablets that came from ancient Sumeria. And these were a pictorial representation of the things that they were, of the energy and time that they were describing. So it's actual information about a transaction. So like a picture of a cow and pictures of bundles of grain. And this is how we started to conceptualize like the original ledger. And a ledger is like an ordering of events. I grew this thing, I sold it to you, and now we have a receipt for that. And then from the adoption of clay tablets, then we started to look at the physical world around us to try and see what other substances might be appropriate substitutes for these receipts. And we started experimenting with all kinds of things that we could find readily, and the monies started to emerge naturally. And this is something I learned from one of my favorite Bitcoiners, Dave Bradley, as this idea that as part of human civilization evolving, we've intuited a collective intelligence so that we can understand and come to an agreement around a money system. This is something, it's like a collective understanding that we've honed together. And so, this is a picture of some different kinds of things that have been money over time: seashells, rye stones. That's the AI's version of a rye stone. And gold. And I had this notion, like, it's interesting to me that throughout history there have been all these different things that people collectively decided was money, and somehow there's a subconscious understanding almost that the durability of the physical thing that we decided to use as a representation of energy and time then somehow imbued that characteristic into how durable that thing was as money. So seashells was like the least enduring form of currency, and gold is essentially an immortal metal. It is the most durable metal over time that exists. And as a form of money, it has also been the most durable and enduring form of money. And gold obviously had physical limitations as it remained a store of value. Gold is super heavy. These are all things everyone learns on the Bitcoin journey. Difficult to transport. The world got to a place where further innovation was a necessity to enable the kinds of like commerce that was happening with early part of globalization, colonization. We needed to rethink what money was. And so the subsequent was like the layer 2, the scaling of gold by turning it into a piece of paper. So now we're kind of like back to where we were with the clay tablets, where now it's actually not the thing of value itself, it's an abstraction of that thing, it's a picture of that thing, And and then we kept innovating, and instead of it actually being an abstraction of the thing, we just put pictures of recognizable people on it, and we told people that was money. And it's the same idea, right? What happened when we started using something that had like a disposable, degradable physical characteristic? That form of money started to exhibit that exact thing. We turned our money into something of no worth, and now a coffee is $100 or whatever it is here. I don't know. We all know what's happened. I think, like, we talk about what's happened since 1971. We'll be talking about what's happened since 2020 in the future. And then this really crazy thing that happened that I don't think we think about often enough is not only did we reduce physical gold into a paper representation of physical gold, but we then said that every political jurisdiction in the world could take their own stab at trying to make their own paper, and that everybody local to their own region would then have to figure out what their paper was worth, and then we would try to figure out what everybody's paper was worth compared to each other. It's just completely absurd, and it's going on now. It's like all, these like solar systems, and they're all expanding, and the universe is expanding, and we're trying to determine how these things relate to each other. And, if we think back to this early idea, we invented money so that we could have a shared understanding of value. And now we've arrived here, where there is like 170 different ideas of what value is. And we use money basically in every way we think about the world around us. We use it to determine how long we need to work to do something. We determine whether something is worth doing or not doing, or buying or not buying. Like, it's continuously shaping our goals and our aspirations and our frustrations. And it creates an almost a subjective experience of reality. And that experience is very different depending on what your piece of paper is. So people in Canada have a completely different experience of money and what that means compared to somebody in Venezuela, where the month-over-month inflation is like 13%, and it's like thousands of percent per year. So the base problem that we were originally trying to solve when we started thinking about forms of money and the invention of money was transforming our energy and time into something that we could store it, preserve it. And this is, I think, the ultimate problem today with the state of decaying money, is that none of us have access to a tool that will simply enable us to store time, which is ticking away for all of us. So as a result of that, what's really happened is we've all gone out and tried to figure out our own ways to do this. That's why some people own houses, some people, art, baseball cards, whatever your thing is, Bitcoin. We are trying to store this thing that is the most precious thing to us. And it's also it's super interesting to me that we have all kinds of phrases in the English language for discussing the idea we all understand. We're killing time, we're buying time, time is flying, time is running out, I don't have enough time, it's a waste of time. We all know about this time problem. We're talking about it all the time. Time is money. And I could pick so many of these, and the reason why I think we are this way is because of what's happened to money itself, right? And we actually have to think about time the way we do because of what a poor job at storing time our money is doing. And because of that, we have less time abundance. It's time, I think. I honestly believe that most people aren't actually pursuing being incredibly wealthy. What people really want, for the most part, is my personal feeling, is autonomy over their time, the ability to feel like they can enjoy the things that are important to them, spend time with their loved ones, not have to work 3 jobs. Like, all of these things are more time problems than wealth problems. But we connect the two because of the price of time. Time actually has a value to us in the same way anything else does. It's actually incredibly valuable to us. And, you know, house prices is such a great example because we actually do, we think about the price you buy or sell your house for, but I think about it as like, we also price houses in time, because if you sign a 30-year mortgage, you're really pricing your life, right? And if you buy a home from someone and you're signing up for that 30-year mortgage, you've effectively monetized 30 years of your life and pay advanced it to the person who you bought the house from, right? And this is what happens. As house prices appreciate, people are forwardly passing an advance on the rest of the 30 years that they're going to have to work to pay that house off. So as these things get further and further out of reach, because the money isn't working, observably, we have less time, and that affects the way we think about our daily lives. And like, this is completely visible all around, like everywhere you look. You know, I think like some of this has to do with the way technology has changed, but some of it is also just a function of how often we think about money. And so one way that I pay attention to how the world is changing is the world that we imagine around us and the things that we decide to build. And so we used to build these like incredible buildings. This is the Parliament building in Victoria, which is like among the nicest buildings in the province. And this is true of like the Parliament buildings all over the country. And we built these buildings when Canada was experiencing almost no inflation. Between 1880 and 1913, inflation in Canada was like 0%. Price of a bottle of Coke didn't change for 60 years. And to build a building like that today would be almost impossible, because the price of lumber went up 700% since 2009. Like, you would just get absolutely creamed trying to think long term about things like this, so nobody does it anymore. And the end result is that the output of the world around us is turning into like a disposable McDonald's world, where we build everything as quickly and cheaply as we can so that we can flip it. And then the rest of us have to all live in that world. And we do experience, whether we acknowledge or not, as things get shittier, we will experience like a form of decay. And I think that these things feed each other, and the way we interact with society, changes that we all probably can see happening, are partially the result of us understanding that the environment is changing. And it's changing because the rules of money are changing. And I always like to point out, for anyone who's new to the Bitcoin world, that this is not a naturally occurring problem that nobody understands why it happens. The system is not broken. It's working exactly how it's meant to. They steal from us, and when they steal from us, they're stealing all of our time. I love visualizing the creature from Jekyll Island as a sea monster, because there was a political cartoon in 1913 before they enacted the Fed that saw this coming. And I think that I like to think about central banks is that they're actually like feasting on our lives, because basically that's what they're doing when they're debasing and stealing that monetary energy that we have to spend our actual lives earning. So thinking about different terms for Bitcoin. Entropy is has a few different ways of being discussed, and in thermodynamics, entropy refers to, and if there's any physicists in here, I'm not a physicist, this is just something I read on Wikipedia. Entropy refers to energy in a closed system that is not being directed at its intended process. And so if you think about a light bulb, and you pass an electrical current through a light bulb, the intended purpose is creating light energy, but it's not 100% efficient, so some of that energy becomes heat and the light bulb becomes hot. And what entropy does in thermodynamics is it's a law of thermodynamics that entropy increases over time. So when there's an inefficiency in the system, this is the law of thermodynamics, that entropy will get worse progressively. And the other description of entropy is an information theory. And in information theory, entropy is a term that describes how much information or how much verbiage is required to describe a system's state. And I think this is like a really perfect way of thinking about our financial system right now, because things have gotten so convoluted and complex as a result of trying to solve this problem that the way the traditional financial system works is completely insane. So I got thinking about this relationship between value and energy and time. I believe that money is an invention we needed to describe the relationship between value, time, and energy. And I think about it this way. This is like grade 7 math, Pythagoras theorem, the idea that if you understand the information about two sides of a triangle, you can always figure out anything about the third. And so this is how I like to think about in a sensible monetary system, there should be a relationship that makes sense between time, energy, and value. And this should be something that we could all understand and agree on in a money system that would make sense. And so if you think about how our money works right now, we base our money or our price of time on what we call clock time. So clock time was incepted in 1657 when the pendulum was invented. And at that point, basically shortly thereafter, the Industrial Revolution happened. We had assembly line manufacturing and whistles happening on shifts, and then school children were being trained to pay attention to clocks. And the advent of the mechanical clock, for the first time, gave people a conception of being able to treat time as a commodity, because we could measure seconds and minutes and hours. And so in the current world, if we're thinking about this relationship, the time part doesn't change because we measure minutes and seconds and hours, and those are fixed. The amount of money that we have that we relate to what those minutes and seconds and hours is worth is changing all the time. So the constant is clock time, but we have this variable that is money. And for this reason, time can only in this system become worth less and less, because as the money that is pricing it becomes worth less, we can't change how we're thinking about the intervals themselves. And Bitcoin is this beautiful alternative because Bitcoin is a different kind of clock, but it also has regular intervals that just don't conform to clock time. But in the Bitcoin world, instead of the time part being fixed and rigid, money is the part that doesn't change. So in this new way of thinking about time, the value piece is sort of connected to time, and it's done that by energy. And what I think is so interesting about all this is that really, like, if we go back to that original idea of what we started using money and it started acting like the things it was made of, you could say that Bitcoin is actually made of energy and time, because when we perform Bitcoin mining, it literally the two kind of component input materials are energy and time. So this is like a form of time energy currency, and it is then behaving that way when we think about it in the real world. And of course, I'm not the only person who had this idea. Lots of different cool people talking about the concept that Bitcoin can travel across time and across space because it exists sort of in information and it's non-physical. And so what I think this could get really cool. Am I on I got to start late. Can I have an extra yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, so where I think this is really interesting is because this idea that we have 170 different forms of money, what that's really doing is creating 170 different subjective experiences of time. And so I think Bitcoin has a much even potentially bigger application rather than just standardizing our understanding of money, but actually changing the way we think about pricing the value of time itself. And if that were to be something that happened across the entire world, then it could be something that then changes the kinds of buildings we build across the entire world. These are downstream civilizational things that happen as a result of us abandoning pricing fixed time in disintegrating money with a rigid relationship between the total amount of money and how much time it takes to make. And it's because Bitcoin is a clock. So yeah, I have this idea. I think that Bitcoin is imposing a rigidity on this concept of the variable value of time, so that in a truly post-Bitcoin world, your time can't be externally devalued without your consent, because the total amount of money has an ironclad relationship to the time that it took to produce. And we even know the schedule, right? Like, we know when the last Bitcoin will be mined. We know the rate at which the issuance is going to decrease. Like, this thing is truly a kind of clock that will enable us to think about things on a time scale that we really don't right now. Like, it's the reverse, right? In the modern world, and Julian's talking about content, if you don't grab somebody's attention on the first 3 seconds of a TikTok, they're going to swipe to the next TikTok. Like, that's really how fucked our perception of time is now, right? Like, we have debased time to the point where that's how concerned we are with our ability to store time. So I think, it's like, and this is kind of going back to Interstellar, this idea that the misconception that the end of time is like the end of human civilization. Going back to this idea about the invention of the mechanical clock. So the mechanical clock absolutely revolutionized the way people started thinking about time, because now all of a sudden, for the first time ever, people could be expected to be somewhere at 1, or they would know something was going to be done at 4, and that was new. Like, so before that invention existed, we just had like sundials and hourglasses, and we were just able to sort of observe time in a much more perceptual way. And so there was, before the clock, a different way of thinking about time. And I think that, I don't know how long this is going to take, but I'm interested in the possibility that we may entirely view time differently in the distant future, when we no longer have a subconscious fear that our time is being printed away. And it kind of has to do with this consciousness model, where what the bottom one is sort of like the ideal state for living an enjoyable life, where the majority of your waking mind moments are spent in the present, and you spend as little time as possible having a paralyzing anxiety about the future and like crippling regret about the past. And like, this is going back to this earlier idea of like, what do we really want? We want to be able to enjoy the finite amount of time that we have in our lives. This is the point of money in the first place. And so I think that Bitcoin, one of the really cool things, and this is where I spend a lot of my wandering moments, thinking about how an understanding of Bitcoin can potentially shift your own subjective perception of time. And I think that Bitcoiners do this all the time, because we start living our lives differently. And when Bitcoiners experience like a low time preference shift, and then you start doing things differently with your choices, you are already experiencing this, whether you've thought about it in that way or not. So the fiat person that's trying to determine whether a 3-second TikTok is worth their attention or not, the Bitcoiner is thinking, should I watch this 22-minute show on Netflix, or should I go do the gross grind? It's going to take me 4 times as long. It's going to be 10,000 times more enjoyable, right? That's that in action. And, what's really cool is this idea that we're multiplying the number of people who are starting to think this way. So I think that we can affect a civilizational change as we sort of hyper-Bitcoinize the rest of the people who are slowly coming along for the ride. There's a concept in traditional finance that's called the time value of money, which states that it's more valuable to have money today, because the more money you have now, the faster you can start growing it. and because you need to grow it, because we all know it's going to be worth less tomorrow. But the real thing, underlying principle here is what the real thing of value is time. And so this is where I think that this idea of like what Bitcoin is really doing should be enabling you to take that financial energy and safely store it so that you can go do something else, something you really enjoy. Make the most of the time that you actually do have. Yeah, so we still trade our energy and time for something, and we might as well trade it for immortal money. And that's the end of my TED Talk. Thanks.